What is up, Evil Dead fans? In this video of the Ash vs. Evil Dead chainsaw build, we're going to talk about molding and casting a couple things. One is the muffler piece, and one is the tanks and the lids. Now, I know some of you say to yourself, well, when you buy a home light, you get that. You get those pieces. And some builders just leave the muffler piece just one giant hunk, just as is, you know, pretty big. But the proper way for Ash vs. Evil Dead, it's a cut down size. And when it comes to the tanks, sometimes when you buy a home light, the caps have been replaced with a couple different styles. Sometimes they can be flat on top, sometimes they can have the wording without the symbol. And if you plan on doing multiple chainsaws, whether it's Ash vs. Evil Dead, Army of Darkness, or Evil Dead 2, this method will help you out. Granted, it won't be real caps like they used on Evil Dead 2 or Army of Darkness, but you can use this method if you have to replace caps, or if you're going to do multiple chainsaws, and have a certain look. This method and the way I do it is a way you can make the caps face the proper direction, no matter if you're doing Evil Dead 2, Army of Darkness, or Ash vs. Evil Dead every time. It does not matter. And you get a nice clean look. Now, some people know that I got a lot of B-stock parts from Rob where they weren't the greatest and he couldn't sell them. So he sent me a bunch of them and he knew I could rework them. Well, when it came to the stock that I had for the caps, I ran out of the really good ones I could work with. And all I have left is like one that's not in the greatest shape. I tried to rework it and add milliput in where there was air bubbles, but it can't really come out clean. When it comes to adding milliput near these ridges, it's kind of a pain. It can be done, I've done it before, but it can be a pain. And so what I had to do is to make a mold of new caps and new tanks. Now, some people could say, why don't you just rework this and recast Rob's? Because I'm not a recaster, so I didn't do that. But this method that I'm going to show you, you can make it look perfect every time. Get those nice clean lines in your caps and in your tanks. And when it comes to muffler, it's pretty easy. I'll show you how to do that too. Let's get to it. First thing, we're going to talk about the tanks and the caps. Now, the first thing you're going to need is an oil tank and a gas tank. You're going to need both because they sit differently. So you want both tanks because they sit in there differently. And this is the oil tank. So what you do, or what I did, is I cut it around and then sealed up any spot that I needed to and taped it down onto a piece of cardboard. And also what I did is I cut the tops down. Now, luckily for me, I have one of Rob's here. I can know the distance from where the cap sits and how many threads are showing, so I can cut it down properly. So after it's cut down, you can see this is one of the ones I used. You can see it's cut down quite a bit, and there's a piece of cardboard on top. Cardboard is glued on there. So when I taped it onto the piece of cardboard, when I put the rubber mold stuff on there, which you can get at Hobby Lobby, it's right here, it's called the Amazing Mold Rubber. So what you do is you tape it on a piece of cardboard and make sure you fill in all the gaps, anything you don't want filled in. Then you build a box around it and then pour the stuff in. When you use that stuff, I'm not going to go over how to use it. Just read the instructions. It's not hard to do. You can get it at Hobby Lobby, you can get it at Michael's. Most places have that. It's not a super fancy item to buy, not like anything like Smooth On has, like, you know, all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's just whatever you want to use to make your mold. I wouldn't use mold putty though, because you're not going to get everything you need into it, all the detail. So you got to do this with oil tank and then the gas tank. You have to do both. So what you want to do is you get your two lids. You want your oil tank. This is an oil, and say I have the gas one. You put those on a piece of cardboard, glue them down to that cardboard. Build the box around it, pour the stuff in. Make sure it cures 100% and read the instructions. Take all the precautions that they suggest you do. Safety first. So after you get done letting those cure, what you have then is you have your rubber mold. And here are my rubber molds. This one you can see has the tanks in there. Now it's getting a little dirty. I've used it quite a bit. And you might see that some of this rough lines up here, those are all gonna be sanded off. It's actually underneath the cap a little bit. Those will be sanded off. Some people can mold and cast stuff so perfectly. I'm a little sloppy, and I do a little reworking, sanding stuff down. And there is the tanks, the 2 tanks. So I got those 2. After that, you get your resin. You can get at Hobby Lobby or Michael's or anywhere you want to buy it. I usually do like a 2-part deal where it's equal parts. You pour together, stir it up, and you put it in. But what happens with undercuts? Now, since you just have a little bit here, the possibility of getting bubbles, air bubbles into your mold or your casting is very minimal. And if you do, to fill those in, I just use Milliput. I just put that on, let it dry overnight, sand it. It takes about 2 minutes to sand. And then you paint it. But very minimal reworking. Now let's look at some caps that are done and in progress. Okay, as you can see, here's a couple caps right here. I poured over a little too much. That's just cutting all this excess off, sanding it down. We have 2 tanks that haven't been reworked. These haven't been reworked. I put a little black paint on there because if there is an air bubble that I need to see, it's easier to see it when it's painted rather than clear. So I put a little paint on there just to see if there's air bubbles I need to fix, or if there's extra little spots that filled in that didn't need to get filled in, I can sand that off. These are 4 caps that are done. As you can see, after sanding it down, nice and flat. There you go. So I got 2 sets of those. And here's a couple that are done. Look how nice that is, right along everything. So that's what you end up with after you clean it up and you sand everything down. Now, what I'm talking about with, you can do any look from Evil Dead 2 all the way to Ash vs. Evil Dead. Let's say you got 2 tanks right here, and you got your oil in the back and your gas in the front, which you see in all the films. Except Evil Dead 1, of course, and Ash vs. Evil Dead, you know, you have to have the gas up front, oil in the back. Well, in Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness, there is a chainsaw where the caps are actually flipped, like that. So you can have the black cap up front, the red in the back. Now, the way you get these on there, after you rework by sanding things down, because you'll need to sand the tops of these down, because the thickness of the cardboard was picked up in your mold. So you want to sand that down. Use a sanding block. I usually go 80 grit then do 150 grit. Leave a little grit on there. Just make sure it's flat. You don't have to make it super smooth, because what you do after that is you just get like a Loctite Ultra Gel super glue. And then you just put it on here. You get your cap. Make sure it's good. You're going to put it in the right position that you want. You make sure you square it up, which is not squared up. I'm doing this one-handed. And then let it sit. Make sure it sits flat. And then that's what you come up with, is that. Look how nice those look. So that's how you do the caps. Like I said, you can put it to any position you want to. If you want the symbols facing this way, that way, it does not matter. This way you get nice clean cuts, not a lot of reworking, a little bit of sanding, a little bit of filling in possibly. I do suggest you use mold release when you decide to make these pieces, because it reduces the tear on your mold. So that's how to do those. Like I said before, Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness had real caps. Ash vs. Evil Dead had resin caps. So this is a way I was able to turn the symbols in the proper direction for Ash vs. Evil Dead. Let's talk about the muffler. Okay, so when it comes to the muffler, I know a lot of people are still saying, why don't you just use the one that you get off a home light? A lot of times I don't buy full home lights, I just buy the parts that I need. And Ash vs. Evil Dead did have molded or cast pieces. They weren't real muffler pieces. Like I said before, some builders, they just leave this big honker on there and put it in for Ash vs. Evil Dead. That is incorrect. You do not want this whole thing. So what I had to do, and I don't have my piece anymore, so I'm going to show you just this with what I did, is I cut it properly all the way around with my Dremel. This is nasty greasy. to about right there, all the way around. You want that slope of the lip about right there. Cut that down nice and flat. Actually taped it down to a piece of cardboard instead of gluing it. It's a lot easier to tape it down. You will pick up the tape lines when you actually make your resin piece, but that's just an easy, quick sanding job. Just 80 grit, 150, and then anything lighter you want to. When it comes to Ash vs. Evil Dead, the mufflers are gridded up. Let me show you one right here. I still gotta paint the inside right there. And there's the bolt you want for really a season 1 look. You want that bolt there, bolt, screw, whatever you want to use, doesn't really matter. It's kind of how you want to attach it. You can see it is cut down and it is gridded up. So it doesn't have to be super pretty. You just don't want a lot of imprints in it. When it comes to getting these, a lot of times you'll see some wear marks right here and here. I usually put those down before I make my cast of it, so it doesn't pick it up. And if it picks up a little bit, minor sanding again. Same method as the caps, doing the molds and the resin pieces. Here is one right here. You see it's kind of shitty, but that's okay. It's all gonna be sanded down and cleaned up. You can see a little tape there where the hole was, and I covered it up with just a piece of tape. Again, quick little sand, done. And here is the big old rubber piece. The way you do this to get that is you have to stick a piece of cardboard or something in there to fill up that cavity all the way through the bottom to hit the cardboard. You don't want the rubber to get into the hole of the whole cavity. So what I'm saying is, I don't want to confuse anybody. You want to cover this hole up. You want to run a piece of cardboard to fill this up here all the way through, but leave it open. You're going to have to make a surrounding on the inside all the way down. So basically a big oval tunnel is what you're going to end up making. If you leave it completely open, then you have all the resin, or not the resin, but you have all the rubber getting inside of it, which will, you're not making anything, really. You would have to actually, if that happened, it would just be ruined. You'd have to start over. If you do just cover this up, you can just cover it up, but you're gonna have to drill it out, which is a lot of work that you don't wanna do. It's easier just to make the little cardboard tunnel all the way to the bottom piece of cardboard, so that tunnel will just sit inside of here. You can make it a little taller if you want, because it's easier to sand that off rather than drill it, because you can see a little bit of it right there with mine. It takes about 10 seconds, just done, gone, nice and smooth. So you saw that, and then basically just sanding, and then there you go. You grit it up however you want to. I do all kinds of methods with glue, two-part epoxies. I can show that later when I go over this. And I put some glue on the inside of here and put sawdust and some sand and dirt and stuff in there, not a whole ton. It hasn't been painted. But yeah, that's what you end up with after you clean it up. Look how nice that looks compared to, you know, this piece. That's how you make that piece. So there it is. It's pretty easy. I'm by no means am I any kind of professional molding or casting. My friend Chris Pollock is very much a professional with that. He's probably got 20 extra years on me. I've been doing it for like 3. But what I do works for me. Sooner or later, I'll get better at it. But what I make sure when I do it, it does come out good and how it needs to look instead of sloppily done. It's just, for me, it's a lot of cleanup with sanding, and that's basically it. But that's a good way to make the caps and tanks. You can do it multiple times. You can just, what I suggest, if you're gonna do multiple chainsaws and you have the tanks and caps, take them off the chainsaw you got. And if it's already cut down for that chainsaw, half the step is there because you already cut the tanks down. Do that same mold technique and casting technique, because when you get another chainsaw, say you want to do Ash vs. Evil Dead or Evil Dead 2 or Army of Darkness, you're ready to go. You can turn the caps whatever direction you want. Regardless, Evil Dead 2, again, and Army of Darkness did have real caps and tanks. At least this way they will be in the right position that you want them to be. So that's how you do that. It's not hard to do. It's mostly just time consuming, putting together the boxes, which is basically just cardboard when I say a box, or however you want to do it, depending on the product that you're going to use for your casting and molding. And just follow the directions of everything you buy. And it's really just, you know, time consuming making the boxes and waiting for things to cure. So it's not too bad. And that's basically it. The next video I'm going to talk about, I think it's either going to be the rest of the block, or it's going to be wrist cuffs. So stay tuned for that. Till next time, you guys stay groovy.